times have changed. There was a time when stability was a virtue, constancy was a quality to be desired, predictability was an aspiration. Today, organizations, whether in the private sector or in the government, are judged by the changes they proactively seek, reactively endure, knowingly embrace, and perhaps unknowingly appropriate. This session is designed with the following learning objectives: to understand the various critical success factors which relate to the domain of e-governance, to understand what change is from a government perspective, to obtain become familiar with factors and forces that bring about change, and to understand how changes can be managed. We have had sessions on strategy, we have had sessions on process re-engineering, we have had sessions on project management. In all these sessions, we looked at good practices. What's the right approach to e-governance? A lot of these are being practiced, and yet if you look at the e-governance domain, the implementation of e-governance initiatives, you find that the showing is extremely poor. It's often quoted that 35% of e-governance initiatives, e-government projects, are total failures. When we say total failures, we mean the initiative was never implemented, or was implemented but was abandoned soon after the implementation commenced, or soon after it went live. So 35% of e-governance projects are total failures. 50% of the projects are what can be termed as partial successes, meaning the major goals of the initiative were not attained, or there were significant undesirable outcome. So 50% are partial success. So that leaves us only with about 15% of projects which can be called as successes, where most stakeholder groups attain their major goals, or they did not experience significant undesirable side effects or outcome. So it's extremely poor showing. We would like in this session, and perhaps in another session related to this, on what factors are responsible for success or failure of e-governance projects. Where might one start? We know there is what is called the e-governance life cycle, EGLC, as it is often termed by various agencies. We know that the e-governance life cycle has many phases. It starts with the strategy or the initiative conceptualization phase, the strategy formulation phase. It then moves on to looking at the processes, the process reform phase, where one would look at processes as they exist, they assess processes, and then come out with a wish list, a to be phase, map the gap, and then try and fill the gap through appropriate practices. So strategy, there is the process phase, there is the procurement phase or preparation for implementation phase. This is where the strategies and the process reforms are translated into detailed project reports. This is where one looks at partnership opportunities, the business models. We have had a separate session on this topic, and then it moves on to the implementation phase. This is relating to the project management issues. So there are different phases in e-governance. So where might an e-governance project fail? It could fail in any of these stages. For instance, it could fail at the due to wrong conceptualization itself. Let's recall one of the examples we looked at in one of our earlier sessions on the strategy. If you recall from that session, we looked at an e-government initiative, a live example where the stakeholders were the e-government, the government department, which had responsibility towards farmers. There were international financing agencies, there were foreign universities, so, and of course the software vendor. The idea was that this team of experts will come together, come out with an initiative, come out with an e-government solution which will address the needs of the farmers in a particular area. This was an action research project. We know from what we discussed in that session that what's set out as an initiative which was aimed at improving the financial position of the farmers ended up being totally different. The farmers wanted more than anything else an information service where they could raise queries on their farming problems to experts, and they'll get back some suggestions, some solutions to their queries. So what this project ended up doing was to design an Android application through which the farmers could send videos or send voice messages and get back response from agriculture experts. If you recall from that example, the project lasted just about 1 year and then it closed down. What were the issues? The issues were many, but from a strategy perspective we can say that an action research project where there are so many stakeholders involved with very diverse set of objectives and goals, without a proper fabric, without a proper framework which would have held them together on a sustained basis, the project really didn't have any chance of surviving in the long term. So one reason why e-governance projects fail, as this example shows, is that the strategy itself is not very optimal. We can move to the next phase of the e-governance life cycle, the process reforms. A good example would be to look at an housing finance e-governance initiative which was implemented in one of the southern states of India. This domain, the idea was the government wanted the economically backward and belonging to a certain section of the society to be given housing subsidies and loans of a particular quantum. Before the e-government initiative was implemented, the entire set of processes were manual. The beneficiary would apply on a hard copy application form. This will come to an officer. The officer will review the content of the application, and if all the information were available, he or she would forward it to a superior officer who will again verify the contents of the documents And if everything was all right, an OK would come back to the first officer. This first officer would then again start a new set of process for coming out with an agreement with the beneficiary. Again, this agreement process would go one complete cycle with the beneficiary, the junior officer and the senior officer coming into the picture. If this process was completed, then the third set of processes for actual disbursement of funds would begin. This was a highly manual process. Checks were prepared, and then checks were posted to the beneficiaries. There were all kinds of issues of checks getting lost and so on. So this department decided to go for a revamp, and they came out, they looked at their processes, and they came out with an e-government initiative. But the reforms which happened in the process area were very limited. All that the department did was to replace manual application form with an online application form, and replace the check process, the manual check process, with a online direct bank transfer process. But rest of the processes remain the same. So with all the delays, all the possibilities of misuse of the position, the power, all the possibilities of being very subjective in deciding or in approving or disapproving an application, all those remained. So the project really, in this sense, didn't really succeed. It was less of a e-government project and more of computerization of certain operations. So one reason why e-government projects don't succeed or don't succeed fully can be attributed to the reforms not being, the process reforms not being carried out very well. We can also look at other stages of the life cycle. But the point is, beyond such factors as suboptimal strategies, poor execution of process reforms, poor project management, etc., there is a much more potent force and a much more encompassing discipline that has a direct impact on e-government projects. And this force is the force of change, and this discipline is the discipline of change management.